When we encounter the ancient civilizations around the world, the Hwandangogi opens our eyes to a universal view of human history, revealing that all humanity shares one common origin. Around 50,000 years ago, as the long ice age came to an end, modern humans first appeared and took their initial steps toward civilization. About 9,000 years ago, in the Tian Shan region of Central Asia, humanity's first nation, Hwanguk, was founded. Hwanguk, composed of 9 tribes across 12 nations, was a golden age where all humanity lived as one family under the light of heaven and earth. Around 6,000 years ago, as desertification and resource scarcity struck Central Asia near the end of the Hwanguk era, humanity began to migrate across the world, spreading out east and west like the wings of a bird, carrying the torch of civilization. In the early 20th century, a groundbreaking archaeological discovery reshaped the history of world civilizations. The Hongshan civilization, unearthed in Inner Mongolia of Northeast Asia, revealed relics and artifacts dating back to the era of Badalguk, Dangun, and early Joseon, thousands of years older than the world's traditionally recognized 4 great civilizations. The Sumerian civilization, known as the root of Western and Indian civilizations, birthed the earliest schools and alphabets of the West, and had law codes predating Hammurabi's by centuries. The Sumerian legacy became the foundation and nourishment for modern Western civilization. From these ancient sites, we can see that the world's 4 great civilizations, rooted in Hwanguk, confirm that humanity is one family from a shared origin. But today, humanity has forgotten its primal culture and golden age spirituality, becoming enslaved to material civilization and casting a shadow over our future. The Korean people, once central to the creation of human civilization, have seen their glorious 9,000-year history severed at the root due to distortions by China and Japan. Even more troubling, we ourselves have come to deny our own roots, teaching our descendants a distorted history as if it were truth. At this moment, Korea stands at a crossroads. Either it will reclaim its true history and lead a new era, or it will lose the historical war of Northeast Asia and fall into decline. At last, a historical text has emerged to reveal the truth of Korean history and uncover humanity's primal culture, free from the distortions of China and Japan. The Hwandangogi is a sacred record of humanity's origin, tracing the 9,000-year lineage of Korean history and offering a universal reinterpretation of ancient civilizations around the world. Written over a millennium by the brightest minds of their time, An Am-ro, Wan Dong-jung, Yi Am, Bom Jang, and Yi Mek, the Hwandangogi reveals the roots of Eastern and Western cultures, royal wisdom, mathematics, and calendar systems. It revives the lost spiritual culture of the Korean people and offers a cosmic vision of harmony for the future of humanity. In the 21st century, as the world becomes one, the starting point for Korea's reunification and leadership in a new era lies in restoring our lost origin history and archetypal culture. With the Hwandangogi Book Concert, we unveil the truth of Korea's and humanity's ancient history, opening the era of cosmic light culture. Together, the 7 billion people of Earth now embark on a great journey to reclaim our shared history and become one family.
In 1911, revered master Gyeonsu published Hwandangogi at Mount Myohyang, evading the swords of Imperial Japan. A century later, Ahn Gyeong-jeon's annotated and translated version of Hwandangogi into Korean has finally come to light. Ahn Gyeong-jeon, the annotator and translator, has dedicated his life to uncovering the original history of the Korean people and the archetypal culture of humanity, with the conviction that the great future of the Korean people and humanity can only be realized through the Tao of Wonshi Banbon, or seeking out beginning and returning to the origin. This annotated and translated version is the culmination of that lifelong passion. This work is the result of his relentless commitment to the empirical study of Hwandangogi, a historical scripture and the sacred text of humanity's archetypal culture, believing that only such study can heal the deep-rooted poison of Japanese colonial historiography and correct China's centuries-long distortion of Korean history. Ahn Gyeong-jeon, the annotator and translator, not only devoted himself to researching both domestic and international literature and collecting materials from historical sites across Northeast Asia and around the globe, but also meticulously examined newly unearthed artifacts to faithfully uncover the historical truth that Hwandangogi seeks to reveal. After 30 years of dedication, he has finally translated Hwandangogi into a comprehensible form, complete with extensive annotations and explanations. This work puts an end to the persistent academic controversy that dismisses Hwandangogi as a forgery and corrects the distorted history, thus revealing Korea's true 9,000-year sovereign lineage and the essence of humanity's archetypal culture.
I believe the publication of the Hwandangogi is truly a historic event. When the original edition was first published in Manchuria, my grandfather, who helped found the Shinhung Military Academy, was serving as an instructor there. It was through the leadership of General Hong Bom-do, who led the victories at the battles of Cheongsan-ri and Bong-odong, and General Oh Dong-jin, that the Hwandangogi was brought to light. Now, 100 years later, President Ahn Gyeong-jeon has completed a full translation of this book here in Berlin and newly dedicated it to the Korean community and the Korean people. This moment is truly meaningful and fills us with hope and inspiration for a new future for Korea. I sincerely welcome and congratulate the hosting of the Hwandangogi Book Concert here in Berlin, Germany, a symbol of peace and unification. It is often said that for Koreans living abroad, the older they grow, the deeper their patriotism and love for their homeland become. So much so that even just seeing the tteokguk brings tears to their eyes. In particular, the Korean community in Germany, which began with those who came as guest workers, stands as a patriotic chapter that cannot be left out of Korea's modern history. The Hwandangogi is a book that reveals the origins and roots of the Korean people, and it is deeply meaningful that this book concert, shedding light on the roots of both Korean and human history, is being held here in Germany. I hope this Hwandangogi Book Concert becomes a valuable opportunity not only for the first generation, but also for the second generation to newly recognize our proud history, embrace their Korean identity, and take pride in our heritage.
Part 1. Revealing the original history of Korean nation and humanity.
In the end, we have ourselves a historical war. The main topic of my speech today is that historical war, the Great Historical War. The political, economic, cultural, and ideological of the great powers in the East and West have been concentrated in the only divided nation in the world, the Republic of Korea. The center of the historical war in this global village has been established from the late 19th century in the Korean peninsula of Northeast Asia. There are several factors that have caused the conflicts between the great powers in the East and West, which have continued throughout modern history. These major factors, once involved in the background of Korea's division, still continue to function as the actual hands of transformation. I would like to thank all of you for attending this meaningful event, and I want to convey my deep and sincere words of gratitude to those who came here far away from Korea, to Germany, as miners or nurses. You have sacrificed your entire lives to bring prosperity to your beloved families and nation during our country's struggles with poverty during the early 60s. There are also people here from different countries as far as from the United States. I'd like to welcome them to this Hwandangogi lecture as well. I met a female cartoonist 2 days ago. There are even people here coming from Korea wanting to take their children to listen to this lecture on the Hwandangogi and educate them, no matter how far Germany is. Last time, I met a businesswoman attending the Hwandangogi concert in LA with her 2 sons. So, I'd like to thank all of you here for coming. The concert today will focus more on the actual question about history than other lectures I have given in the past. The question is, why should we recover the forgotten, distorted, and denied archetypal culture and ancient history of the East? Why is it so important for us to regain the ancient Eastern history in our lives today? There are cultures centered around Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, which are well known to the East and West, Christianity, the foundation of Western civilization, Islam in the Middle East, and Hinduism in India. There had been an archetypal culture and history in the East, which had lasted for 7,000 years before the modern cultural sphere. And its history has neither been properly conveyed to the West, nor even to the Koreans, who were the leading characters of ancient Eastern civilization. In short, what are the hidden tasks in recovering the primordial historical culture of the East and the archetype of spiritual culture? As the primordial culture of the East has been distorted, the ideas brought forth by Eastern learning in the beginning of modern history in the late 19th century have been distorted as well. Therefore, we have lost our wide, open eyes full of wisdom and can no longer see the true nature of the crisis of modern civilization deeply and fundamentally. The primordial culture of the Eastern civilization is called, in technical terms, the archetypal culture. Today, I wish we could open our eyes of wisdom to understand the archetypal culture of humanity of 7,000 years ago, and at the same time, correct the distorted ideas as was promoted by Eastern learning at the beginning of modern history. Consequently, we could recover our consciousness of humanity's culture and recognize the biggest issue that we must overcome in order to pave the way for a new history of human civilization in the future. Thereby, all of us could share the very same vision of a new civilization in which all 7 billion people of humanity live together as one family. Today, I've separated my lecture in 3 main parts. The first part is the time of reflection. What is the reality of historical distortion and the deep wounds it leaves behind? The second part is the time of awakening. What is the sublime wisdom of the original history of the Eastern civilization and its archetypal culture? And the third part is the time of healing and sharing visions of a new civilization. I would like to share a wise course of action, a genuine message of enlightenment about a life by which we can overcome the problems of the crises that humanity faces today after thoroughly reflecting on them. Today, I will conclude my speech by highlighting the true nature of the spiritual culture of the Korean race, once a leading character of cultural history in the East, the original religion of Koreans, the spiritual culture by which the Koreans have lived for 9,000 years without neglecting a single day. At the beginning of the first part of my speech in Germany, I would like to say that it is time to recover the lost history of human genesis and the archetypal culture of the East. I got a chance to look at photos and other visual media from the Neuss Museum in Germany, the Pergamon Museum, and field trips throughout Great Britain, France, Austria, Hungary, and other historical sites, which I visited while traveling throughout the world. This is the true form of the Eastern culture and history, the spiritual culture and religion of the East. As we are Koreans, I think it is very important for us to know the culture and history of our fatherland, the spiritual culture and the archetypal religion of the East in order to reflect on our lives and live as genuine Koreans.
The first gateway for seeking out the primordial culture of Northeast Asia.
During this time of reflection, we will see how much the primordial historical culture of the East has been distorted, what the truth is, and how the deep scars caused by historical distortion remain in our hearts. When carefully contemplating the issue of discovering the lost historical culture of the East, we can find 2 symbolic characters representing the title of the very creator of ancient historical culture. In the Chinese literature, the classic of mountains and seas, or Shanhai Jing, which is well known to us, we have this sentence. The white people, the white-clad race, live in the nation of Sushin. They serve a big tree and call it Eungsang. All the secrets of Eastern ancient culture lie in these 2 words. What is Eungsang then? At a simple glance, the character Eung means hero, Sang means always. So, one may think it means that a hero is alive, but that is not what it means. Before Dangun Wanggeom established the Joseon dynasty, the original name of Korea was Baedal, so called by the Baedal tribe. The very person who established the state of Baedal 6,000 years ago, the founder of today's Korea, is Hwanung. The character Eungsang comes from the Eung of Hwanung, the heavenly emperor Hwanung, and the character Sang means constant or always. So, a big mountain such as a holy sacred mountain would be named Sansang, where san means mountain. That mountain would be considered to contain the presence of Hwanung. An enormous tree would be called Ungsang and served as a soul tree. The Hwandangogi shows us that this tradition of Sansang and Ungsang has been in the Korean race for thousands of years. So, Hwanung has always been with us. The heavenly emperor Hwanung has always been with us. In English, we could probably express this idea as, Hwanung is always with us. These words are indeed such a great historical saying. The more we hear it, the more happiness we, our Korean race, feel. Hwanung is always with us. Visiting and traveling around Japan, we found a shrine places dedicated to the heavenly emperor Hwanung actually do exist. In Kyushu, there is a statue of Hwanung in the Dangun Cave on Mount Hiko. As can be observed in this culture of serving Buddha statues in the East or in Buddhism, there had already been such culture of serving ancestors with Buddha-like statues even before Buddhism came to this land. Also, as we can see throughout the entire area of Mongol or Siberia, when people cross over the mountains, they usually pile up pebbles and offer prayers while walking around the heap of stones 3 times like at a Sonungdang in Korea. Am I keeping conscious of God at this very moment? People cross over the mountain ranges while remaining conscious to those questions. A shaman rock can be seen above Lake Baikal, which is considered a sacred place of the historical culture of human genesis, and it has 13 big pillars, collectively called Sergei. This is a variation of the soul tree. In an Egypt pyramid, we can see 2 pillars called obelisks. These are also a variation of the soul tree according to the interpretation from some of Western scholars. In Japan, all the Shinto shrines are located in forests and have a tree that they offer their prayers to. Just as the divine altar trees or the sate, harvest poles found in this culture, other cultures generally worship sacred images based on their religions, such as the Buddha, the Virgin Mary, or whatever they may be. Whether the culture of Ovu, or Sergei, or Sote, or the culture of Buddha statues, what is their origin? It is Ungsang. It came from Ungsang. I saw the most startling and amazing exhibit when I visited the Pergamon Museum. Upon entering the museum, you can see an Ishtar Gate, the 8th gate to the inner city of Babylon. A famous German scholar dismantled the entire gate and took it here. His skills are exceptional, and on the first floor of the museum, you can see the symbols which made us aware of the wisdom behind Eastern archetypal culture. These pieces of art are meticulously engraved. In the picture, you can see a circle round like the sun. Below the circle is a rectangle, and below that is an image of a grandfather carved at the base. The amazing thing here is that there are 2 more identical images engraved on either left or right side, so there are a total of 3 images. Although we could make various interpretations about the identity of the old white-bearded man in the shrine, the archetype of this image is surely Hwanung, who came from the East, from the first cultural sphere of humanity 6,000 years ago. Therefore, we should always remember Hwanung.
2 volumes of historical books that reveal the primordial history of the East.
In order to understand the origin of East Asian history, we must refer to 2 books. Where then did the primordial history of Korea, the original leading character of the Eastern culture, originate? The Japanese imperialists, after the Gangwado Unequal Treaty, killed 8 million Koreans and burned 200,000 books of all Korean life, culture, and history in Namsan Mountain. However, they carefully left this one book, one of the authentic history books, the mainstream historians value. The history book, the Samguk Yusa, Legends and History of the 3 Ancient Kingdoms, records the history of human genesis and the primordial culture and history of the Korean race during the Gojo Sun period. But at the same time, because of this, as we can see today, the historicity of the first established nation of humanity and the primordial era of the Korean race became distorted, denied, and completely eradicated. The birthplace of the historical culture of Koreans and human genesis was recorded in this part on the Gojoseon period, but at the same time, it is also in this part where history was completely eradicated. This part on the Gojoseon period in the Samguk Yusa is extremely valuable for us 7 billion people living today. Our historical hometown, the birthplace of the first country in human history, the original nation in human society, the history of you and I, Eastern and Western civilization, all the nations and all the tribes in this global village, was described in the part on the Gojoseon period in the Samguk Yusa. The records reveal the historical fact that the heavenly emperor Hwanung of the East established his own nation, but this historical fact was completely distorted, denied, and eradicated as a story of myth by the Japanese imperialist colonial historians. So let's take a brief look at the original text.
Gojoseon in the Samguk Yusa. In the Book of Wei it is written, 2,000 years ago, Dangun Wangom established a state named Joseon and made Asadal his capital. This coincided with the era of Emperor Yao's reign. In the Gogi, it is written that long ago there was Hwanguk. Hwanung of Seojabu aspired to save all under heaven and bring deliverance to the human world. Realizing his son's aspiration, Hwanan, ruler of Hwanguk, looked upon the mountains of Samwisan and Taebaeksan and deemed them worthy of bestowing widespread benefits on humanity. Hwanin thus granted his son Hwanung the 3 treasures, the heavenly emblems and seals, and sent him forth to rule this region. Hwanung led a group of 3,000 subjects in descending to the foot of the divine tree at the summit of Taebaeksan mountain. He named this place Sinzi, divine city, and he was called the heavenly emperor. Hwanung led the Pungbek, Usa, and Unsa in overseeing more than 360 human affairs, including agriculture, imperial command, punishment, treating illnesses, and judging good and evil. He administered the governance and edification of the people through the truth of spirit teaching. During this period, the Bear Clan and Tiger Clan, who lived in the same cave, continually beseeched Samsin Sangjenim and Hwanung to change them into true human beings. In response, Hwanung bestowed them with divine items that would enable their minds to ascend to a higher spiritual state. These were a bundle of mugwort and 20 cloves of garlic. Hwanung said, "Eat these, avoid the sun, and pray for 100 days. If you do, you shall regain the original and true form of humanity." The Bear Clan and Tiger Clan ate the mugwort and garlic bestowed by Hwanung. And at the end of 21 days, members of the Bear Clan became women. However, the Tiger Clan failed to comply with the precepts and could not attain true human form. Shortly thereafter, a woman of the Bear Clan had no one to marry. She came to the foot of the divine tree daily and prayed to be blessed with a baby. At this, Hwanung granted her temporary acceptance into the radiant nation, married her, and they begot a son named Dangun Wangom.
This book details how Chinggis Khan of the Mongols, who had once greatly shaken up the world, the East and West, established the Great Yuan dynasty and caused the Joseon dynasty to suffer from life-threatening crises. During this time, a Buddhist monk, Il-yeon, who wanted to inspire the spirit of independence, wrote this part on the Gojoseon period. However, the author doesn't seem to actually have read some of the old documents, such as the Samsongi of the Hwandangogi, and he was inclined towards Buddhism as a Buddhist monk. So there are many limits to what he could have recorded. The record states that Hwanung came to the east with 3,000 people, which, assuming families of 5, means about 20,000 pioneers in total. They came to Baekdusan Mountain, where they established the nation of Baidal with its capital at Sinsi. The next record is actually a story about when the nation was founded. A bear tribe and a tiger tribe approached Hwanung and begged him to teach them the culture of cosmic brightness, the living culture of Hwanguk. But this story has been literally interpreted as one bear and one tiger approaching Hwanung and begging him to make them human by taking off their beast masks. It may probably be that no one else in the world, aside from us Koreans, could make such a stupid interpretation. Right here in Berlin, as we know well, Der Bear of Berlin means the bear. Then are all Berliners bears? Are their ancestors all bears? No, it is a totem in which they all live together, the totem. The prominent tribe among the northern nomads who came from the east of Siberia is the Turks, otherwise known as the Turkish. The ancestors of Turkey today were the ones who invaded the West and destroyed the Eastern Roman Empire during the period of the Ottoman Empire. The ancestors of the Turks wore wolf masks on their heads. They are just totems. The Turks are not wolves themselves. Those tribes received spiritual inspirations from heaven and built their totems considering such animals as their guardian spirits. Korean textbooks uniformly misinterpret the bear and tiger clans as just a bear and a tiger wanting to become human, ignoring the deeper meaning in Samguk Yusa. Historically, garlic and mugwort have generally been used in food culture for practitioners to warm up their bodies, to overcome the cold and expel demons, as is taught in Eastern medicine. Doing intensive meditation for 100 days, one can acquire the body of a genuine human. So, it has become a sort of ritual to worship heaven and earth inside a cave for 21 days. Analyzing this part carefully, Hwanung moves to the east as the eldest son, succeeding the cultural spirit of cosmic brightness and the fundamental mindset of Hwanguk, where Hwan means brightness. According to the Hwandangogi, Hwanung came to this area because the Tabaxan mountain in the east was considered the most appropriate area for promoting far-reaching benefits for humanity, among others, such as the Altai Mountains, Kumaksan Mountains, and Samwisan Mountains in China. So the part on Gojo-san in the Samguk Yusa left some margin of distortion like this, though. It left the records about Hwanguk, the birthplace of human history. However, the Japanese imperialists denied the history of Hwanguk, Baidal, and Joseon. The three sacred empires were not part of the history of national formation. They started to deny these history records on several grounds. After Korean Dr. Yi Byung-do, a first-generation colonial historian, the second and third generation colonial historians have continuously taught the distorted history with colonial biases to children in schools. And due to this vicious cycle, all history textbooks in this world contain distorted information about Korean history. Let's take a brief look. How have the facts been distorted? Both the West and the East have incorrect information about Korea in their history textbooks. They say that Korea was under the total colonial rule of China or Yuan dynasty of Mongol tribes. Koreans were under the semi-colonial rule of the Han dynasty and under the total colonial rule of the Yuan dynasty. This is 100% wrong and a complete fabrication. During the rule of Qin Shi Huang of the Jin dynasty, did Joseon hand over half of its territory to China like this? Based on these historical facts, when the south and north is unified, the part north of the Han River will belong to China. This is the reality of the Northeast Project. History textbooks all over the world, including those of Taiwan, Japan, China, the United States, France, and Germany, have accepted not a version of history is not based on the original historical facts of ancient Korea, the leading character of Eastern history, but rather the history that was fabricated and distorted by the Japanese colonial historians without any criticism and documented it as truth. This is due to Koreans' tendencies to undervalue their own traditional culture and spirit, prevalent in our daily lives like poisonous mushrooms. The Hwandangogi records the Hwanguk, Beetle, and Joseon states in a specific and systematic way. Almost all of our precious historical records descended from the times of Silla and Baekje were collected and recorded in the Hwandangogi. It is a compilation of Korean history recorded by 5 different authors in a span of 1,000 years. After the Joseon dynasty, it is now the proper time for all of us to read the real ancient history of Korea together. The first edition of this book came out in 1911. What kind of book is the Hwandangogi? Hwandangogi reveals the origin of Western civilization and also the founder of the first historical nation of Korea, China, and Japan of Northeast Asia. It also reveals the true archetypal aspects of mathematics, astronomy, science, philosophy, religion, language, and day-to-day lives of humanity. In short, the Hwandangogi is the original text of cosmology. It is the sole original text of the history of human genesis and the archetypal culture of humanity among all other ancient texts of history, religion, and culture in this world. So, I often say the Hwandangogi is a historical scripture. It is a scripture of the archetypal culture in the history of human genesis. The Hwandangogi starts with the history of the 3 sacred empires and also explains the principles of the human mind's composition, what the human being is, who you are, who I am, and what humanity is. It doesn't simply say that the human mind is just a mind or a one mind, as Buddhism or other existing religions explain. Quite uniquely, it uses the term Samil-Simbop, the mindset of 3-1. Why is the human mind a Samil-Simbop, the mindset of 3-1? The preface of the Hwandangogi says that the genuine teaching of Samil-Simbop is contained only in this book. In other words, the issue of us as human beings recovering the true humanity, maturing and regaining our true nature can only be resolved when we awaken our eyes to the archetypal culture of humanity, the spirit of the 7,000-year-old historical cultures of the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Joseon dynasties. Only then can we recover the archetype of the human mind, the true nature of humanity. Recovering the spirit of the historical culture of the 3 sacred empires, the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Joseon dynasties, we can attain the original, true human mind, the one mind. These days, I strive to convey Samil-Simbop, the mindset of 3-1, with heartfelt sincerity.
Second part, the time of awakening.
Now for the second part of this discourse, the time of awakening. The primordial history, the archetypal culture of the Korean race, and the birthplace and fatherland of human history, where the humanity in East and West lived together, was Hwanguk, from which Baedal branched out in the East through one successor, and in the Middle East, crossing over the Tian Shan mountain range, becoming Sumer. The civilization of Sumer is the origin of Western civilization and the root of Christian culture. Then, what is the core essence of the history of the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Joseon dynasties? I want to emphasize one phrase here that will break down your previous preconceptions. Professor Kim Hyun-jin, residing in Australia, wrote a nice and amazing book about the Hun tribe last year, just a few months ago. He concludes that it is an ideological illusion of intellectuals to divide the East and the West. It is a twisted ideological fantasy for us to separate Europe and Asia. He uses the term ideological illusion here. It is a meaningless practice to separate the East and the West. The East and the West are indeed inseparable. The culture of nomadic leaders of the Eurasian continent had already entered Europe 2,000 years ago. Traces of Manchurian cultures and ways of life can be seen in Hungarian and German museums as they had already been brought to the upper class. Although the East and the West could be classified by racial, geographical, cultural, or religious characteristics. However, we cannot actually divide the essence of human life into East and West. This could be considered a real, awe-inspiring, and mature thought of a great scholar. Now, let's analyze the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Dangun Joseon dynasties and observe how the cultural and historical remains from these periods have been kept and exhibited in the cultural remains and museums of Korea and other areas of the world.
The birthplace of human history, Hwanguk.
What is Hwanguk? It is a word defined by its first syllable. The name of the nation is thus defined by Hwan. Then what is Hwan? Hwan means the original character of the great nature. It is the genuine nature of the human mind, the original nature of God. The universe, all living beings, and all things in this universe are defined by this single character. It is Hwan, which means brightness. How bright is it? Hwan radiates throughout the entire universe. It is called the brightness of heaven, the heavenly brightness, Hwan. And Mother Earth receives that brightness of heaven and the seeds of life, the genes from heaven, and tries to accomplish the will of heaven. And the brightness of Mother Earth is called Dan. So, when we say Hwandan, we refer to the brightness of heaven and the brightness of earth. Hwandan refers to the experience of the brightness of heaven and earth of the universe. Hwandangogi is the history of the Han tribe, ancient Koreans, and the ancestors of all humanity who lived in the period of human genesis, experiencing the brightness of heaven and earth. That is the general idea of Hwandangogi. With that understanding, you could read through the historical culture of 9,000 years. The Hwandangogi conveys the story of an ancient people who experienced the brilliance of life and so didn't have any worldly desires or struggles in their minds like us. And there were no conflicts or wars like those in our times. A British scholar, Stephen Taylor, says in his book, The Fall, that no weaponry has been excavated in the graves of 6,000 years ago in either the East or the West. They lived as one with nature and considered harmony to be the central value of their lives. Although people at the time lived by foraging for fruits and digging up roots, they lived much healthier and longer than the people who lived a sedentary lifestyle, farming and eating meat. Unearthing 3 places at the same time, 6,000 years ago, average heights were over 176 centimeters for men and 167 centimeters for women. Considering these ideas a bit, we can say that the period of the Hwanguk, Bedal, and Joseon dynasties was the era of the archetypal culture of humanity. Like the genes of the human body, there are genes of the archetypal culture in human cultures. These original genes, the archetypal culture, never changes no matter how long the much time passes. They experienced cosmic radiance throughout their lives. The purpose of their life was simple. Although simple, it was fundamental. The eternal value of life is in the brightness, the radiance. Because the purpose of life was in this brightness and radiance, people enjoyed long lives with good health. The Hwanguk Bongi in the Hwandangogi states that people of the time cultivated themselves pretty well, each of them declaring to have become a Hwan, a human of radiance or an enlightened being. The ruler of those radiant people was called In, Hwanan, or Heavenly Sovereign Hwanan. Looking at the Sumerian civilization in the southern part of Iraq, the origin of Western civilization, Christianity, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and Indian civilization, the leader was called En, or In. They were recorded to have crossed the Tian Shan mountain range. The fact that the leader, the emperor of Hwanguk, was called In connects them. Their leaders were, in a sense, Hwanan. The people in the Hwanguk, Bedal, and Joseon dynasties interpreted the radiance or brightness of the universe itself as God, the Creator. The evidence of the Creator's very existence is this cosmic radiance. In the beginning, there was only one ray of radiant light in the entire universe. Let's see the first sentence of the Hwandangogi. The state founded by our Hwan people was the most ancient of all states. And Samguk Yusa states, long ago there was Hwanguk. The first sentence of this book, the original text of the archetypal historical culture of humanity, says the state founded by our Hwan people was the most ancient of all states. However, analyzing this sentence a little bit, the 2 characters in front reveal a sentence inside the sentence. O Hwan means that we are Hwan. The character O here can be translated as either we or I. Thus it means that I am Hwan, you are Hwan, and we, all 7 billion human beings, are Hwan. We are the living radiance of the universe, the God itself. I always emphasize this. There is no greater ideology than this about human nobility. A single character conveys the simplest answer to the great and eternal issue of humanity out of any conclusion from any religion and ideology of the East and the West. In short, it says that humans are the cosmic radiance itself, the living God itself. Therefore, it says that the origin of human history, the eternal birthplace of all humanity's history, including Korea and all other tribes of the world, is Hwanguk. Since Korea especially has inherited the historical lineage and authority from the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Joseon dynasties, holds these records, and also possesses the same cultural spirit, the origin of Korea is indeed Hwanguk. We, as Koreans, should never forget Hwanguk. The Hwan itself is the spirit. There is the phrase, the Hwan is the perfect one. When we experience this radiance and the brightness comes into our body, we can be perfect and one with all others in the universe. All conflicts and disputes in our minds and all troubles and suffering disappear in an instant. So the Spirit resides in this radiant brightness, and this Spirit engenders the universe through the number 3. Since the primordial Spirit created the universe and controls it through the principle of the number 3, the Creator is not just a one Spirit, but a Samson or triune Spirit. This is most significant characteristic of the archetypal mentality of the Eastern culture. In the era of Hwanguk, people lived with the radiance of heaven at the center of their lives. The creation transformation of the Spirit, the God's power of creation, had been mainly employed during the era of the radiance of heaven. So, the Hwanguk of the period of the radiance of heaven is the era of the creation transformation civilization. The Eastern Baedal dynasty, successor to Hwanguk, and the Sumer civilization, root of Western culture, emerged during the era of Mother Earth's radiance, with daily tools developing around 6,000 years ago. Visiting museums with discerning eyes, you could really obtain a new, refreshing perspective of historical cultures from around the world. Samson, or the Triune Spirit, is composed of 3. The radiance of heaven, the radiance of earth, and the radiance of humanity. The radiance of heaven functions as creation transformation. The radiance of earth functions as edification. As for the radiance of humanity, it was during the era of Jongdosanim that leaders were enlightened to the cosmic radiance and the radiance of heaven and earth in their bodies in order to rule over current human history. As the functions of Samson are birth, growth, and governance, it is also called the creation, edification, and governance Samson. Looking at the civilizations of the Hwanguk, Baedal, and Joseon dynasties on a large scale, Hwanguk was the civilization of creation transformation, Baedal was the civilization of edification, and Dangun Joseon was the civilization of governance. In short, Samson's will shaped human politics and history.
Exploring the Hwanguk era of Korea through relics and artifacts.
The Samsongi part of the Hwandangogi states that it cannot be clearly determined whether Hwanguk existed around 60,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago. It says it is impossible to know which one is right. I have traveled around the world contemplating this one phrase for 30 years. While traveling throughout Siberia, I was contemplating why this author, enlightened and with such historical consciousness, divided the historical time of Hwanguk into 2 different time periods. Let's look at Siberia. Around 50,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, appeared. Around 20,000 to 10,000 years ago, ice masses about 4 kilometers high in Europe melted down, flowing into the Atlantic Ocean. And exceptionally, Southwest Asia, near Europe, experienced 3 short glacial eras from around 16,000 to 11,000 years ago. Some documents recorded that people in Europe at the time migrated east to Siberia in order to stay alive. alive. There are graphs and records in French museums explaining that as well. When the Stone Age civilization started around 10,000 years ago, the human civilization started making giant leaps around 6,000 years ago. Afterwards, the global climate again changed the area of Central Asia into desert around 6,000 years ago. During this time, the Hwanguk civilization was divided into the east and the west like the two wings of a butterfly. Hwanguk was divided into the Betel and Sumerian civilizations. Let's take a look at the history of Hwanguk from this historical viewpoint. The first civilized nation in the world, Hwanguk, was founded around 10,000 years ago. Then was the history between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago a period of complete savagery? According to the great experts who have explored global civilizations, we consider all the people from the Paleolithic age as savages because of our poor historical common sense. This misunderstanding is currently rooted in our consciousness. Stephen Taylor strongly emphasizes this point. Let's look at historical remains in museums that have been unearthed from historical sites around the world from 50,000 to 30,000 years ago to before 10,000 years ago. The remains from around 40,000 years ago are actually almost the same as the modern arts today. The sculptures and drawings are not inferior to those of today at all. 47,000 years ago, they made scrapers out of crystal and white gems. Try to feel the technique of the ancient craftsmen. Chauvet cave paintings from 42,000 years ago are nearly equal to today's great art. Children's toys from between 35,000 and 10,000 years ago were also unearthed in the East. Around 30,000 years ago in the West, statues of pregnant women showing abundant hip with her breasts exposed began to appear. Most of the statues of goddesses in the West had such a figure. We then found a praying sculpture from Russia. These are remains from around 27,000 to 28,000 years ago. They seem to be brother and sister. The boy and girl were buried with their heads facing each other. The upper portion is their original form, the lower portion the remaining bones. This is a coffin from Malta near Lake Baikal. Around the remaining bones are small beads made of mammoth ivory, which required at least 6,000 hours of work to make. So we can say that there was already a specialized social organization system around 30,000 years ago. It is not so different from modern civilization. And this is Irkutsk. It is called the Paris of Siberia, located on the left side of Lake Baikal. In the historical museum there, the remains displayed inside the first showcase in the first floor have a dot in the center of the remains and other dots above. I asked an archaeology specialist, what does it look like? He then said that it must be a calendar. But the backside wasn't on display here. It was currently in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. The backside of the remains looked like the head of a snake. It appears to be waving. In Mongolia, similar remains were found, including a shaman's ceremonial robe. It might have been a type of calendar of the time. Mysterious, isn't it? Now, back to around 20,000 years ago, we see the Lascaux cave painting located in southwestern France. How great are these paintings? The sense of coloring, texture, and vividness. We can see a Baroque style here, even the trend of dynamic modern art as well. They made sculptures of mammoth ivory around 15,000 years ago, engraving figures in animal bone. Remains from the Raymondin stone cave in France 17,000 years ago. Look at those fishing hooks, how exquisite they are. Even with modern technology, we can hardly improve on them. This picture carved in deer bone, isn't it interesting? The remains of a 10,000-year-old pyramid has been found in the Okinawa seabed, which some say is the oldest historical site in Japan. British writer and journalist Graham Hancock is known to have dived there more than 100 times. On top of this enormous pyramid palace, there is a solar stone which signifies the culture of radiance. Look at the solar stone here. This is the same solar stone found in the palace altars where the kings of the Andes Mountains in South America lived at that time. Exactly the same thing. When traveling around all over the world like this, we can feel that there is a cultural universality. Global civilization's universality is seen in sun symbol relics, expressing a cultural spirit that yearned for and sought union with cosmic radiance. Hwanguk comprises of former Hwanguk and later Hwanguk. We will now uncover the later Hwanguk era from around 10,000 years ago and afterward. Former Hwanguk began with the parents of all humanity, Naban and Amun, 50,000 years ago. And later Hwanguk began about 10,000 years ago. Exactly 9,211 years have passed this year since the establishment of later Hwanguk. 7 Hwanin ruled over the entire Hwanguk period, so each of them would actually seem to have governed for several hundred years. However, this cannot be understood without comprehending the culture of health and longevity of the time. In chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Hwangdi Neijing, there is a dialogue. How did ancient people live long lives without aging even over 100 years old? It is a dialogue between the subject Chibo and the emperor Hwangdi. Chibo answered that the ancient people lived in moderation and adapted themselves to nature. These days, however, people simply discharge the essence of their body and drink wine any time, so they get old and near death by the time they're in their 50s. So the history of humanity has extended from the era of the genuine human to the era of the sages and heroes to the fall of man. The era of the genuine human, when they lived as one with the cosmic radiance, the brightness of nature as ultimate humans. An era of truly enlightened human beings once existed, known in cultural anthropology as the Golden Age. It was an era in which people lived by experiencing the cosmic radiance, being one with God, and so lived with health and longevity. It was an era of no wars, where no weaponry has been unearthed even in their graves. This era is called the Golden Age. In that case, where was Hwanguk? According to the Hwandangogi, the territory of Hwanguk was 20,000 ri in the direction of north and south and 50,000 ru in the direction of east and west. There are also said to be 8 or 9 states located around the heavenly lake where the first mother and father of humanity, Naban and Aman, born as human beings, crossed the water. Tian Shan is considered the roof of earth, located either in the eastern side of the mountains of the Pamirs or the Burkhan Cauldron located east of Lake Baikal, which is said to imply sacred willow. Still others consider the Burkhan Cauldron to be Tian Shan. But when I went to Lake Baikal and listened to the sound of the waves and passed by the deepest part of the lake, I had a feeling that it was not a lake, but an ocean. When I heard the sounds of the waves of the lake were louder than the oceans. Moving toward the center of the lake by ship, I had a feeling that the waves were just like the blood of Mother Earth. I could not help but feel such sublime, sacred, and divine energy with my whole body in that place. I also saw waves in the middle of the lake that looked like the patterns of earthenwares from 10,000 years ago. I believe that the patterns of the earthenwares might imitate the pattern of those waves. Now it shows the names of 12 Hwanguks and 3,301 years of the Hwanguk period. Remains show that human civilization suddenly started to flourish after the Neolithic culture began 10,000 years ago. The most representative remains of the time are the comb pattern pottery, well known to us. The historians use the term comb for this because the pattern looks similar to that, but it is actually a distortion from the complete ignorance about the reality of the ancient people's lives. It is not a comb teeth pattern, but rather a sunlight pattern. In an Egyptian museum, I saw round dots like grains of rice at the end of the comb teeth pattern on the pottery. That is it. That is what explains it. Because the source of life is the sun, they drew the forms of all things born and grown by the light of the sun. Some say that the pattern resembles rain showers, and others see them differently, but interpretation is free. The comb teeth pattern is actually the pattern of sunlight. It is the first design in the history of the universal design culture of humanity. The pattern reflects Hwanguk's life rooted in cosmic radiance. When the sun rose in the morning, they would always bow to the sun and offer prayer. This lifestyle was recorded in the Hwandangogi. When the full moon rose, they would face it and make an oath to live as one with it. This lifestyle is described in the book. The first thing we notice in the remains of Hwanguk is the use of jade. The Danish archaeologist Dr. Thomson introduced the three-age system in archaeology, the ages of stone, bronze, and iron. But this system cannot convey the core of human spiritual culture. However, when Chinese archaeologists unearthed 10,000-year-old remains of the so-called the Hongshan culture in Northeast Asia, jade artifacts spilled out of the archaeological sites from over 8,000 years ago. The Xiao Hexi culture, the oldest Neolithic culture, is said to have been founded in Northeast Asia around 9,000 to 8,500 years ago. However, 12,000-year-old remains have in fact been found on Jeju-do Island. The oldest jade artifacts in the world to be unearthed, 4 jade artifacts, have been from the Xinglongwa culture around 8,000 years ago. They made rings just like earrings. They are almost identical to computer-manufactured products. It's evident when you see them in person in the museum. Because of the vast number of jade artifacts to come out of there, Chinese archaeologists are arguing that there was a jade age following the Neolithic and Paleolithic ages. So a new archaeological age should be added. Let's take a closer look at this. The original ondol system, a way of heating the floor to keep warm during winter, developed during this time. None of the approximately 1 billion Chinese people use this ondol system. They sleep in beds. There is a relic museum in Siberia where the Xiongnu tribe live. They set up the folk museum out in the fields where ondol systems were used. The Xiongnu tribe created these ondol systems, primitive ondols. There were also artifacts made from obsidian, which is much stronger, harder, and sharper than steel. They used obsidian at the time. We can also assume from their sculptures that they also raised silkworms and made clothes as well as built boats for fishing. American archaeologist Sarah Millage Nelson arranges and presents this information in her book, The Archaeology of Northeast China. The Sahai culture's Seoksoryung of stones piled up in the shape of a dragon dates back 7,600 years. Chinese call this the first dragon of China. They discovered them around 20 years ago. Next, earthenware from the Jiaobaogu culture in the shape of a phoenix has been found. Whether called a phoenix or a griffin, this is the oldest earthenware in the shape of a phoenix. A phoenix sculpture dating back to 7,000 years ago was unearthed in the industrial city, Shenyang, in China. Proof of traces of the Hwanguk civilization in Europe has been found in the remains of a bear totem from 7,500 to 7,300 years ago, excavated in Hungary. People using agricultural techniques from the East migrated into France 7,000 years ago. There had been no rapid progress in their culture between 9,000 and 7,000 years ago. However, these immigrants came in, and suddenly they started to serve their own ancestors, making personal home altars in order to perform ancestral memorial rites. So, the enormous dolmen culture was introduced here in France around 7,000 years ago, and agricultural techniques between 7,000 and 6,000 years ago. There are as many as 20,000 dolmens in France. In Korea, there are around 25,000 dolmens. It is said that there are around 50,000 or 60,000 dolmens around the entire world. The dolmen culture was widely distributed all over the world in both the East and West from 6,000 to 7,000 years ago until 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. You can see a magnificent spread of dolmens in places like Carnac, France. The general view here is that among the dolmens in France, there are table-type dolmens which has a heavenly cover on top and 2 pillars standing on either side, just like the dolmens on Manisan Mountain. This represents the culture of Chombukyang, heaven 1 on top, earth 2, rooted on earth, and human 3, in between heaven and earth. Heaven, earth, and human are one. It symbolizes that when humans live as one with their parents, heaven and earth, they will become eternal beings. When the ancient people buried the bodies of their parents and siblings into dolmen graves, the archetypal spirit of their culture and the precious value of their life were embedded in their rituals. The culture of Hwanguk is the radiance of heaven, living life and experiencing the cosmic radiance. The name of the nation is also one character. Hwan means the brightness. Both the main subject of life and the purpose of history are represented by one character, Hwan. Hwanguk is not just the ancient birthplace of human history that has already disappeared, but rather a symbol of the eternal life of humanity, the purpose and ideals of human history, and all the lofty dreams and ultimate wishes of mankind throughout the past, present, and future. Hwanguk is where we all must return and where humanity's future lies.
To be continued in Part 2.